So I'll just invite Jeff back up here and wondering if anybody has any questions. It's a bit of an intimidating room, but go for it, yes.
I would like to first thank you both for the interesting and informative presentation. I have a question for Dr. Bloomberg. I hope I said it right. So in your presentation, you mentioned that those not so bioavailable bioactives can be converted to the active form by our gut microbiota. So which part of the gut would you see or expect to see this conversion to happen, like the small intestine or the large intestine or both?
Large intestine. Most of the gut microbiota that people talk about are in fact the colonic microbiota. There are some in the small intestine, but the vast bulk of them are found in the colon. What was surprising is that one of the biotransformation that happens there, you don't think of the colon as a source for bioavailability. But for these smaller catabolites, they absolutely can get through.
Thank you.
Thanks. I have a question for Dr. Bloomberg, just relating to juice versus whole fruit. I guess it's kind of controversial right now. They're looking at reevaluating whether juice serving could be counted as a fruit in Canada. And unfortunately, the data suggests that people don't eat the recommendations anyway, by and large, a very small percentage. What's the benefit of having, if a whole fruit is the ideal, then why not recommend that rather than allowing for someone to count the juice as a fruit? I mean, people will still drink juice, but if you were a parent who was making the recommendation to give a juice box to your child, if it's as easy to pick out a whole fruit, why not have that recommendation from the government or the health organizations?
I'm not suggesting that recommendations for fruit consumption, for whole fruit consumption, are not just fine, and more would even be better. What I'm saying is that in some of the current guidelines, it seems to denigrate the juice as a reasonable source, that you should eat the whole fruit. It's true, you do get less fiber. There are other sources of fiber in your diet than just from fruit. The thing is, for many people, and apparently based on preferences for kids, fruit juice is preferable. It's more portable, it's easier to consume, and whatever. So the idea that you're not getting the fiber, it's true. Fiber intake is also low. But one of the things that may be happening, I would love to tell you we have more than just suggestive evidence, but the bioactives in fruit juices may be richer than in the whole fruit, because in the processing, the squeezing of whole fruit, you mix the albedo, the pith, and the core in that process, releasing these polyphenols from that part, which then gets left behind. So in many cases, you may have a richer and more bioavailable source of these polyphenols from the juice than from the whole fruit. I'm not saying don't eat the whole fruit. I'm just saying that there are benefits to be derived, and so I think that you can look at them as equivalent in many aspects with the difference in fiber.
So I guess also eat the peel as well. But also I worry about if it can count and it's coming to maybe in a food service or a school or some type of industrial setting where it's a money versus what you have to provide, that juice could be put in and counted as a fruit serving rather than, if it can count as a fruit, then economics will dictate it'll be chosen at some point. Is that a worry?
So getting a little out of my area of expertise. I think that it's perfectly okay for what we know about providing essential nutrients and bioactives, that fruit juice, by my radical definition, which counts the phytochemicals, is a nutrient-dense food. So the difference between the whole fruit and the juice is just the fiber. That's it. So in many, if you want to say, the whole fruit is better because you get the fiber. However, we're faced with the reality of what's readily available, year-round, conveniently packaged. I'm talking about, I get a little concerned when you talk about those juice boxes. I am talking about 100% juice, which you can get in boxes, but you can also get fruit drinks in boxes as well, and that is not what I'm talking about.
Yeah, sorry, another question for Dr. Blumberg. About the sugar controversy, so even the Canadian Stroke and Heart Foundation are recommending that after exercise you should be drinking water and not fruit juice because of the high sugar content. I know it's fructose, but what was your opinion on that?
So people drink more water than they do fruit juice. That's just fine. Fruit juices and whole fruits both contain sugar. 100% fruit juice doesn't contain more sugar than the whole fruit, but the glycemic index is lower with the whole fruit because of the presence of the fiber. I think, to me, the bottom line is there an association with all of these calories from 100% fruit juices with overweight and obesity? And there isn't. I would suggest that, every calorie is not equivalent. It does depend on the source of the calorie, how you eat it, what you're eating it with. All of those kinds of things complicate the fact that I would be concerned if, I read this in some of the policy work, that fruit juice is just a delivery system for sugar. Well, that's not fair. In fact, it's ridiculous because it's got all of these other important essential nutrients and phytochemicals.
Okay, so my question is also for Dr. Blumberg, and it's about nutrient-nutrient interactions. So if gut microbiota does impact bioavailability of the bioactive properties of fruit juice, how does fiber impact that? So like the bioavailability?
Well, that's a really good question. Do you know of any data that would talk about that? So what we do know, so the data that I'm familiar with doesn't come from fruit juice per se. We certainly know that dietary fiber is a prebiotic, that it increases microbial diversity, particularly an increase in the lactic acid producing bacteria, the bifidobacteria, the lactobacillus, and so on, and we consider that to be a good thing. What we know from other flavonoid work, but not from fruit juice, is that the reaction goes both ways, so that the gut microbiota can break down particularly the oligomeric and polymeric forms of flavonoids and other polyphenols into bioactive catabolites, but at the same time, it also increases the microbial diversity so that the flavonoids are actually having a beneficial effect on gut microbiota, at least when you look at things like some cranberry proanthocyanidins, some black tea, theorubicins and theaflavins, where you see that double benefit, breaking down to bioavailable flavonoids or phenolics, and also increasing microbiota diversity.
I guess this is more of a comment than it is a specific question, but I think we all, in addition to the differences being fiber, when you consume foods, there's a whole lot of things that go on with the consumption of food that aren't similar between the whole food and the juice. And those include things like just the eating behavior, satiety, taste, effects on, I mean, you suggested that there was no effect on glycemic index specifically to the contents, that it was due to the fiber content, but there's a number of gut hormones and various other things that change in response to a whole food, and they include things like delays in gastric emptying, et cetera. So I don't want to say that I'm not saying juice is bad, but I don't think we want to make them to be equivalent. You're right that it may be more difficult to get people to eat whole foods. under some circumstances, but I think as a society we want to encourage, when those are available and when they're affordable, that those form the majority of the diet. And I think that's what Canada's Nutrition Guide is trying to do. It's not saying don't consume these, it's trying to encourage where available and when you can to consume whole foods, because in reality the epidemiology stresses the benefits of a whole diet, which includes lifestyle factors, not just individual food components, and also includes other kind of nutrient environment interactions.
I don't disagree. I don't disagree. My concern, which I may have overstated, but my concern is the guidelines that say, and drink less juice, or limit juice for children. I think that's not good advice. But you're right, and I think I was trying to say that, when we talk about things like glycemic load, that the whole food certainly has a better profile than any juice would. You're absolutely right.
Michael McBurney with DSM Nutritional Products. I enjoyed both of your presentations. Regarding the juice recommendations, isn't the question really in the mind who the consumer is as we ask and talk about it? Because one of the concerns is around fiber or satiety or excess calories. And so it's really whether we're thinking about somebody that we're trying to constrain calories, or whether we're thinking about somebody that we really want to get more of these essential nutrients that are present in fruit, and how do we get increased consumption. So do we need to think more about the tails of the population rather than the average intake, and be thinking about the person that is way over consuming at one tail, or the person that is way under consuming at the other tail, and how do we encourage them to have appropriate behavior?
Is that a question? I mean, it's a really good point, and one of the things that I would love to see to help move us in that direction, and I don't know anybody that disagrees with it, it's just not happening, and that is the idea that we can develop some reference values. DRIs or something completely different, because we have the challenge that these bioactives, their absence does not lead to a deficiency syndrome. And that's been the classic way in which we develop DRIs. So what do we do when there is no harm of inadequacy? I would argue that it's actually there, but harder to measure. So what are the optimal intakes? And I would tell you that at least based on all of the available data now, if anything, and you were to get it from whole foods, and we're going to talk about benefits of flavonoids and carotenoids and isothiocyanates and so on, we're going to actually say, no, 5 a day, way too little. We're going to have to start consuming more, and it just has to do with recognizing the real value, or my real definition of nutrient density. That's not just about vitamins and minerals, but about all of these other phytochemicals with which we evolved. Eating a largely plant-based diet, and our biological systems are attuned to getting a lot of these if they're going to operate in an optimal way. We just don't have the data, certainly not for all phytochemicals, but I would argue for some, about what that value should be. And if you look at some things, if you look at some of the flavanols, if you look at some of the anthocyanins and some of the carotenoids like lutein, what more do you need? You have in vitro data, you have animal model data, you have observational data, you have randomized clinical trial data that suggest what those doses should be. And I would tell you, in every case, they're going to be achieved with diets that are going to be a lot more plant-based and a lot more rich in fruits and vegetables and whole grains than are currently advised.
I think that's just all the time that we have for questions right now, but I know Dr. Bloomberg and Dr. Sang will be around for a little bit longer. Thank you guys so much for attending. And if you can care to join me one more time in thanking our two speakers.